Alright, thank you for watching. I watched a debate. Here's my summary of it, or my thoughts on it. The debate was between Apostate Prophet, that's his YouTube name, and Nadir Ahmed. Nadir used the Apostate Prophet's real name sometimes. I think that was a little bit rude. You got a YouTube name, you're on a debate on the internet, use the person's YouTube name. And the debate was hosted by Aaron Ra, and he was on his channel. The subject of the debate was, are there scientific errors in the Quran? Apostate Prophet, if you can't figure out from his name, he's apostatized from something. He is not a Muslim anymore. He grew up a Muslim. He was a believing Muslim for some time. And Apostate Prophet got to speak first. The format was 3-minute intervals. Apostate Prophet, I guess it started to prepare for a more common debate format where you get a long speak and a long speech, and then you start talking back and forth. So he introduced his past. He pointed out, he claims that Muslims are not allowed to even question if there are errors in the Quran because of the Muslim belief about the inerrancy of the book and the perfection of it. Nadir's made the claim there are scientific miracles in the Quran, and it is a scientific miracle with no errors, and it even corrects scientific errors of the Bible. And it agrees with modern science, and there would be no way to show that without these people challenging it, making the claim, so that he could have debates like this. That claim doesn't make sense. If a book is true and makes sense, or it's got something there, you can just tell people about it. You don't need to be refuting somebody who disbelieves in the book. The first claim that Apostate Prophet made was at the end of the world. There's a hadith that says that the sun will rise in the west instead of the east, and at that point in time there will be no repentance. That's of course based on a hadith, but the Quran talks like the sun travels instead of us moving, like the sun and the moon orbit together, and the moon follows the sun. Nadir said he thought they were doing one verse or one point, but he sounded like he wasn't sure what he wanted. Do you want 3 minutes, or do you want one point back and forth? You're forcing somebody to sacrifice time they could have said something in if you force them to only do 1 point at a time, and there is a time limit. He claims that the sun, since the sun rising is an act of, the sun rising in the west, will that be an act of God or man? And so it doesn't apply to science if it's a miracle, he says. He defined what he thought miracles were, and said the sun has no stopping point, and its perspective from the earth. Yeah. So I do think a future prophecy about something happening does not really belong in a debate about whether a book is scientifically accurate. How do you know the future? How can you disprove the future, or say that that's not true, or say that it's proven true with something in the future? But the Apostate Prophet's only point was not about that future prophecy, but the whole concept of what the sun does and what the Quran says about what the sun does. Apostate Prophet pointed out you need the hadith to explain the Quran. If not understanding something equals a miracle, and that's the idea you're using to measure, miracle, then the Quran can't be wrong. That's bad logic. He said it's Quran chapter 36 verse 38 where the sun runs its course to a resting place. Then the host asked him, how do they define or determine what is a scientific error? It's a good thing to be sure about, to understand when people are talking about that subject. Apostate Prophet answered that question by saying it would be a statement about observed things that are objectively wrong. Nadir tried to share his screen and he wasn't successful. And he claimed the sun does have a stopping. He claimed if the Quran really claimed the sun had a stopping point, he would leave Islam. He promised to leave Islam more than once in this debate if it was proven to be inaccurate. He says the Quran does not say the word for stop, because the word for stop is mustakir, but the word is actually stability. That's a better translation of the word that says stopping in some translations. His wife says that he should not debate because he is not that word stable, and he doesn't have a good job or something like that. He questions whether the apostate prophet understands Arabic. He questioned whether a Muslim who believed in Islam when he was an adult and lived in Turkey understands enough Arabic to know the Quran. That doesn't make sense to me. That's a weak argument. He probably does know enough Arabic to understand the Quran. Apostate prophet said he never said that Nadir would not leave Islam if he saw a scientific error. He said that Muslims are not allowed to even think about the possibility of there being a mistake. And if there is a mistake, Muslims will call it a miracle. And when he was quoting the Quran, he was quoting Marmaduke Pickthall, who is a Muslim. You know, he might be, I'm not sure what year Pickthall lived in, Marmaduke Pickthall. He did one translation of the Quran that some people use, and I'm guessing he got things right since he was a native English speaker, spent years studying Arabic, and translated the Quran. Nadir accused the apostate prophet of not caring about... he doesn't care about translations. His idea about how to translate it is to copy and paste into Google Translate the translation of the Arabic of the Quran to find out what it says. But that's a bad idea because words change meaning sometimes. Words can have more than one meaning, one word, more than one meaning. And that's quite an insult to all those believers in the Quran over the centuries who have translated it already. I think we should trust the translators who already did it already, especially if multiple translators agree on what something means. The host asked, what does a place of stability mean? And Nadir gave no answer. He said it was open to interpretation. Apostate prophet read Pickthall. Points out Dhul Qarnayn saw the sun set in a murky spring. And in verse 90 of that same chapter, Dhul Qarnayn saw the sun rising in the east over a people with no shield. Obviously, it doesn't matter where the sun rises if the sun is a ball and the earth is a ball and it's way out there, and that's the same distance, from the earth all the time. Let's see. Nadir complained about using English translations. The claim that the word for rising there is actually the word for appears. So a lot of Muslim believers have translated the Quran wrong when they wrote rising, and they should have written appear. Alright. And the host asks again, how do you define what is a scientific error? Nadir said not interpret. Yeah, he said it's not something that's interpretation, but it's clear. He gave the example of a mustard seed being the smallest seed. That would be a scientific error, he claims. That's not a scientific error when Jesus says a mustard seed is the smallest seed if he's not giving a biology lesson and he's just talking to the people based on their understanding and making a parable or analogy based on common understanding of the people. And that was the point Jesus was making when he talked about the mustard seed being a small seed. He claimed that Christian Prince, David Wood, and Sam Shamoon run from debates about Bible errors. I've never seen them do that. They're willing to talk about it on videos I've seen. And he claimed they were doing taqiyya and deception. No, they aren't. Apostate Prophet pointed out this is not about the Bible. And pointed out that Nadir had no response to chapter 36, verse 38 of the Quran. He didn't expect a proper response. And the Quran does not understand what the sun is and stars are, according to the Apostate Prophet. He cited chapter 36, verse 6, chapter 41, verse 12, chapter 67, verse 5. Pointing out that the Quran says the nearest heaven has an adornment of lamps that are missiles that are shot at the devils or thrown at the devils that try to get up into heaven to hear God's plans. That's in chapter 37, verses 6 through 10. Nadir was hoping for a different point. And asked for a hadith quote. And, yeah, so, and Apostate Prophet pointed out the hadith are irrelevant. And, yeah, clear, not the main point. But the Quran was clear about what the Quran's claiming without the hadith on that point. According to Nadir, the word is not star. It's translated as star, or is being interpreted as star. It's a word for a lamp. There's a different word for star. But the Apostate Prophet pointed out it does not. Yeah, the Quran says that shooting stars are stars being shot at demons. It's clear. The Quran's calling it a shooting star, a star shot at demons. And, yeah. But later on in the debate, they tried to, get Nadir to answer, what are lamps then? The word is lamp, and Apostate Prophet's not saying that the word isn't lamp, but he's saying that the word lamp there is not literal, but a poetic name for the stars, because it's describing what's up in the sky. And they asked Nadir, what are the lamps if they're not stars? And he never gave an answer. They got to the question and answer session of the debate, and somebody thought that the Quran chapter 71 verse 19 is a better example of the Quran being unscientific, because it says Allah spread the earth out like a carpet. Apostate Prophet thought that's not the best point. Nadir said that that spreading out is not about the shape of the earth, but just that God put the earth out. So it's not unscientific because it's not saying the earth is flat. There's a question asking how you would recognize a scientific error. I gave an example of two things in the Bible: a tall tree where you could see the whole world from the top of the tree. That is not a scientific error because it's not. It was a dream. It was a dream with a point and a lesson. It was not claiming to be reality. Just like you probably have some weird dreams where you do weird things or see weird things that aren't reality. And God can use metaphors that aren't reality to teach his prophet something. Or a mountain where you can see all the world. That might have been hyperbole, might have been seeing it by spiritual power or something like that. Nadir said we need to give the scriptures the benefit of the doubt, but he does not give the Bible the benefit of the doubt. Talked about mustard seeds again, accused Christians of doing taqiyya. Somebody asked about a flying horse. Apostate Prophet pointed out that it's not in the Quran. And the question that was asked, why didn't Allah create everybody for heaven? Nadir pointed out that's not the topic and didn't answer it. He's right about that being a separate topic. But that's an interesting question. Why wouldn't God create everyone for heaven if he's forcing people where to go? There's a question that, about if the errors are from a perspective. Apostate Prophet said that sometimes the errors could be a matter of perspective. And he asked Muslims to just ask themselves what they would think if they weren't raised and indoctrinated to think certain ways about the Quran. Nadir made the claim the Quran is a scientific miracle. Next question. was asking about how do you determine what in the Quran supports science, basically, and how do you know it's not your confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is when you have a bias and you look for things that confirm it, so you might not be looking at things clearly. And Nadir said that's the reason why he likes debates like that, but he never explained how he can be certain he's not having confirmation bias. And Nadir was pressed to give an actual answer to the question, and he said don't jump to conclusions, but didn't give an answer. There's a question about how to explain the verse in the Quran that says that sperm comes from between the backbones and the ribs. Apostate Prophet didn't bring that up as one of his points. He thinks that something's not clear about that verse. And Nadir claimed it's a scientific miracle, and he pulled out a diagram, put a diagram on the screen that did not show the place where sperm or semen or seminal fluid is created as being between the backbone and the ribs. And Adam, Apostate Prophet called that a straw man and said the Quran says semen, not seminal fluid. Question was Nadir, how is he any different than the Christians making some arguments that Christians make? And he accused Christians of smearing and jeering and having fear, and Christians calling things metaphorical and poetic, and accused Christian Prince David Wood of Sam Shamoon, not being willing to talk about the subject. And the next question was asking Nadir, pointing out that Islam took the books from Greece to Baghdad, and Muhammad had them. The questioner is asking, I thought that happened after Muhammad died, so I think this question might not match exactly with reality, history. And Nadir claimed there's no evidence for Muhammad copying anything. Apostate Prophet pointed out Muhammad was a merchant, traveled around a lot, and heard a lot of stories, and picked up the stories. The question was about Christian traditions, Christian traditional corresponding verses in the Quran. Traditional Christian beliefs that correspond to verses in the Quran. Isn't Nadir insulting and condescending? Nadir claimed that Apostate Prophet mocked and ridiculed the Quran and had to be reprimanded. But Apostate Prophet said Nadir did not answer the question, and he doesn't agree to debate with Muslims who are only going to insult. He wants to actually talk about the subject. And Nadir promised to be friendly, and he was assaulting and attacking and being despicable, like most Muslim apologists, or like some Muslim apologists that Apostate Prophet has noticed. And Apostate Prophet respects Christians because of the teachings about love and forgiveness. The Quran lacks anything about love. The Quran has more negative verses than positive verses about love, like telling believers to not love non-believers, not be friends with non-believers, ordering them to subjugate non-believers. So with a book teaching that, what would you expect? How do you expect people to act if their book tells them that non-believers are deaf, dumb, and blind? There's a question about spiders, because the Quran says, verse 29:41, something about strong. The spiders have the weakest house, but actually spider silk is a very strong material. And Nadir claimed that's no contradiction, but didn't explain how. And next question was, isn't Nadir making the Quran, his book, retroactively fit with science, with scientific explanations, and how does he eliminate his confirmation bias? Nadir claimed, calling that, they're all must answer. Everybody needs to answer that question about the confirmation bias. And he accused Apostate Prophet of attacking the Quran. by saying that it says not to love the disbelievers, but quoting is not attacking. And Apostate Prophet quoted the Quran many times in this debate. Apostate Prophet said he's always freely thinking, and he's not tied down by some dogma, so that's how he avoids confirmation bias. There's a question about whether Muslims have more ribs, and Nadir said that's just mocking. No, that's a legitimate question when you're claiming something happens between the ribs and the backbone, and my ribs my ribs stop here. The thing that the Quran is claiming happens between the ribs and the backbone happens down here. It's not between the ribs and the backbone. Unless Muslims have more ribs and their ribs get all the way down to here. That's a legitimate question. Not mocking. There's a question about any proof independent of the Bible. Nadir claimed that we know now that sperm is what determines whether a child will be a male or a female, and that the Quran says that, and it corrects scientific errors in the Bible. The Quran does. And he gave an example finally. He said that in the Bible, Noah's flood is the whole world. Yes, that's clear. The Bible does say Noah's flood, well, God's flood, but when Noah was the prophet, God's been around the whole time, so saying God's flood doesn't help narrow it down in the time of Earth history. The Bible is crystal clear. Noah's flood was the entire globe, the whole planet, everything. And Nadir is claiming there's evidence of a local flood, and the Quran calls it a local flood. The Quran says Noah's people. That could mean the whole world was Noah's people, so the Quran's not crystal clear about that. But Nadir is definitely wrong. There's good evidence of a worldwide flood. Rock layers that are similar, that are continent-wide. Similar rock layers on different continents are all evidences of a worldwide flood. If there were a worldwide flood, what would there be? One evidence you would find, one thing that would happen in a worldwide flood, billions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the earth, and we have that. So that the Quran did not correct anything there. There's a question about how can a God who designed the world not know that the sun never sets in Scandinavia in the summer? Maybe they named the month June. That question is important because Ramadan fasting is based on sun up and sun down. I have overheard Muslims talking about certain years they're looking forward to Ramadan because it's a short fast, because it's the time of the year and where they're living when the daylight is shorter. Let's see. Apostate Prophet said he's written 60 scientific mistakes, or found 60 scientific mistakes. And the Quran does demand fasting, praying, and sleeping based on when the sun goes down. Modern scholars have said that you should go on Mecca time for that, but those are modern scholars, not the original Quran saying go by Mecca time. The Nadir says there's a hadith that the Antichrist in the last days is going to make 40 days look like a year, and so they're going to have to estimate time, so they should just estimate time if they're a Muslim living in Scandinavia. Okay, it would be helpful if that was in the Quran or one of the writings of Muhammad, to not just many years later scholars saying, oh, crap, our instructions don't match up and would not make sense in this part of the world. Okay, Nadir's last closing remarks. He admitted to being condescending, but accused Apostate Prophet of deserving it for not doing research. The Apostate Prophet read the Quran in multiple languages, multiple translations to make sure he got it right. He researched. Nadir is proving himself to not be a good source of information. He accused Christian Prince of David Wood of being next to Apostate Prophet. Apostate Prophet was all by himself. There was no need to bring David Wood and Sam Shamoon and Christian Prince into this debate because the subject of the debate was the Quran. And Nadir, I wonder if he was like, doesn't have anything good to say about the Quran, so he's like, filling time with other stuff and distractions. Apostate Prophet said, pointed out Quran, chapter 36, verse 38, is one of the scientific errors in the Quran that he is claiming. And Nadir claimed that he proved the Quran, but he didn't. And he would hope for there to be a decent Muslim apologist out there. And that is my summary of this debate, where Apostate Prophet definitely made better points, although some of his points were a little bit weak. Alright, thank you for watching. Have a good day.